keep moving here. We'll build on this momentum. So Joe, if you're ready, you can pull up your slides. Next, we're going to hear from Joe LaForest. Joe is the Associate Director for the University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. He provides technology to enable more effective use of information. He leads system development on center applications for the delivery of images, videos, presentations, occurrence data, maps, and other user-created content. He also serves as co-director for the Southern IPM Center and facilitates partnerships to leverage the capabilities of disparate data systems and maximize the benefit to all stakeholders. Prior to joining UGA in 2006, he received his bachelor's in urban forestry and dual masters in entomology and plant pathology from The Ohio State University. All right, Joe, if you're ready, you can take things away.
Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, NASMA, for helping to put this summit together and host this. It's been really good to see the questions and the interaction going on. I get to have the fun of talking of something that's a little on the edge of what a lot of people get to think about. And it's integrating diagnostic labs into EDDMapS. EDDMapS continues to evolve from sitting around looking at where we were when the system first launched. We got out a minimal value product that could get something done and help inform people. And every year we sit down with folks using the systems and say, all right, what else does this need to do? How can this make your life easier? How do we actually put technology to use to help you, as opposed to be one more thing you have to do and one more report you have to get out? And so the notion of diagnostic labs and bringing them into the verification flow has been around for a while. Main reason for it is there's limits to what you can do verifying reports in any system. That if I get a report of, in this case, rosette disease, or a report of tar spot of corn here, I'm not necessarily going to look at the picture and that looks like the symptoms, but is there virus in that plant? Without an actual test, I'm not necessarily willing to double down on that. For something like this, I see a nice Palmer amaranth in front of a field and I'm only seeing one, and that's a really clean field. Is that resistant? From just looking at it, it would be very hard for us to be able to tell. And when we're talking about something like tar spot of corn, I mean, you could barely even see these little structures on the leaf surface, and to actually confirm, you're going down and looking at this under a microscope. It's not something a lot of field personnel are equipped for. It's something that we don't really have good field assays to go out and do this in the field with an ELISA. And even if you did have it, how good is the reliability of that test? So it starts coming into, there are folks that do this. How do we connect with them? How do I go to the extra step where I can't just look at it? I need to go for further testing. So we started this thing up that I wanted to be able to drop a point on a map. And we have this for verifiers already. I drop a point on the map, I select the species, it tells me who will get that report. We use that tool. It's on the tools and training point page, or it's on the tools page on EDDMapS, to verify what we know the logic of the system's doing. We wanted the same thing for diagnostic labs. So if there is a lab willing to test for a certain thing, here, this tells me exactly who would be willing to serve that. Getting buy-in from the different diagnostic labs, whether we're at a land-grant university and associated with the National Plant Diagnostic Network, private testing labs, gets to be a bit of a challenge because they already have their own existing workflows and other ways they're doing things. It gets to be even more of a challenge when we're talking about research labs, but we could at least start saying this might, through what EDDMapS is doing for trying to provide some of this early detection and rapid response, provide a stream of samples coming in and might be something to look for. So this does exist for a small number of pathogens where we have testing labs available. You drop a point and it tells you not only what lab is willing to provide that test, but also what protocol they would actually run. From the lab side, some of them still aren't in the place where they actually have a system for version control, which is an exciting topic, let me tell you, for their protocols. So that if I tested a sample in 2020, and I move up to 2023, is it the same exact protocol? Did they change what buffers they were using or reagents or their suppliers? What were they doing? So for the diagnostic labs, we said, look, here's a way that you can actually put your protocols in here, because we're going to need to know some of that information if we're going to get you a good sample. Here's your protocol in here. Here's how you can maintain what's going on in your lab. And we went a step further and said, let's actually open this up between labs. So for the labs participating, they can see what protocols other labs have shared publicly. By doing that, they can actually say, oh, they've got a really nice extraction technique. I'd love to use it. Let me go ahead and bring that into my lab and continue to use the protocol they have. And the system's smart enough to go, if that other lab I'm using their protocol for ever changes their protocol, notify me about that. I'd like to know when this protocol is updated because there's something better. So it starts providing this function and this community around diagnostic labs and folks that are providing this testing to support what is the best method to be using. This is all tying into that. I now have my cadre of labs that are in the system. They're sharing protocols. I know where they can provide testing for it. And with that, we get to the point of interacting with the people who actually made the original report. We wanted it that if somebody says, I would like to request a sample to be sent for this because the picture looks good, it could be Rose Rosette, I want a sample. We send out to the person that made the report the sampling instructions. You need to go get a gallon-size Ziploc bag. You need to go fill that with symptomatic shoots, and it tells you step by step, here's how you get me a good sample. Here's your packing slip. Just put that straight into the envelope or the box with everything else. And here's the shipping label. So how can we handle a bunch of the logistics of getting the sample to go out to that lab? We then took it a little step further and said, there's going to be some communication going on here. And as much as everyone loves having one more email in their inbox, sometimes they're necessary. So between the reporter, a verifier, and the lab, we have where the report initially comes in and the verifier says, hey, can you send me a sample of that? When the reporter sends a sample, it lets the lab and the verifier know the sample was received. That goes back to the reporter. When results are told, that goes back to the verifier. And then for verification and follow-up, the verifier now has that additional data to talk with the reporter and say, all right, turns out you do have Rose Rosette. Here's what we'd recommend you doing from this point forward. It helps close that loop so everything's documented as terms of that a sample was actually sent, it was received by the lab, and what's going on with each of these. Where I get all kinds of thrilled is the enhanced data that we then can provide in EDDMapS. You've all seen the EDDMapS pages where we have reports. This is for a particular report of Rose Rosette disease. Here's all the usual report information you get, plus the pictures of the report at that time. I scroll down a little further on the page. Oh, I have lab results. So here's the idea of the protocol that was used because we're in version control. Here's the title. Here's the lab that performed this test. And here's actually the procedure that they followed in doing this test. It actually goes further into if you're a molecular genetics person, here's actually the protocol they were following. Because in this case, they are okay with this protocol being publicly available. There's nothing confidential here. It's helping advance the discussion about proper diagnostics and good methodology. And at the very end of all this, it was a positive result. And here's the comments, including the CT values from the real-time PCR they ran. So if there's ever a question in the future of, all right, you have this report of Rose Rosette disease, are you sure? Well, yes, we are. It wasn't just based on symptomology. Here's all the data. Here's the entire chain of what happened and the result we had. Where I'm really, really excited about this is what we can do with this in the future. This is looking at the Rose Rosette data we currently have in the system. And it's saying whether or not the lighter blue colors where it's expertise, somebody went, oh yeah, there's Rose Rosette in that county. We gathered all the commonly held knowledge from the experts, and that's what's currently in that map. Versus I looked at a photo and yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Rose Rosette. To no, I actually got a specimen. I looked at it and I can't see virus particles, but it had the mite on it that helps carry this virus around. It's a pretty good bet that was Rose Rosette. To finally diagnostic lab testing. So if I wanted to structure a survey to follow up on any of the known infestations, I have locations I could go back to and look at this. We could even go a step further with that and say with that lab testing, if it turns out those primers that were used for that PCR, those molecular tests to identify that this was this pathogen, turns out they cross-reacted. And we now have a better extraction routine. We have better primers. We have better technology to get a better result. I can pull all that data, look at it, and we can select up a sampling routine. We can say, all right, we want to go resample these locations. We know exact places. In some cases, the plants may still be there. How do we follow up? And taking this for diseases, for resistance, for anything you need that additional follow-up, it's just taking it a step further for what you can do when you know how something was actually confirmed in the field. We are starting to expand beyond this now. We've had this up and working. We're getting some additional pathogens, additional resistance targets into the system for verifying, and people are running their early detection and rapid response programs using EDDMapS to do this. What we've started looking at this now is, well, I've got protocols, I've got lab addresses, and I know the interests of different folks and what they're looking at. Could we start doing some things with post-verification integration? That, all right, I've just told you that you have Brazilian pepper. Well, do you know there's a Brazilian pepper biocontrol program? They're actually rearing the agents and they will ship it to you. They'd like you to tell you when they released it, and they'd like you to do some follow-ups, maybe at 6 months and a year, to know how those populations are doing. But if you're already engaged with them, why wouldn't you provide that for the sample or the biocontrol agents they're helping you release? There's plenty of research programs across the United States trying to look at the genetics of different populations. So if I know they're interested in it and what it takes to get a sample to them, why not tie into research programs that are working on this and saying, all right, turns out you have garlic mustard. There's a group doing a genetic study on garlic mustard. They'd really like you to give them a sample. Would you go out and do this for them? And it's helping just close the loop and start to further a lot of the research and development to get better control tactics, know more about how these populations are moving around and how their genetics are changing. Being that I tend to hang out on the ag side quite a bit, I'm really more excited about some of the stuff we're looking at for georeferencing resources for management. That if I just found out you have Joro spider and now you're up into Tennessee, where I believe we've got a county or two that's popped up. Well, here's the Tennessee guidelines for what you should do about Joro spider, and just kind of locating that information, getting that extra mile to the people that are reporting, because a lot of them, they're new to invasives, they're new to different pests showing up, and they really need help just to know what to do after they have the problem. So it's a lot of things we're looking at just to improve EDDMapS and continue that flow. Once the data gets in the system, that's not it. That's not the end of the road. Now we need to inform management. We need to get people engaged. And how do we better do that? Through what we can provide. So with that, I'm probably a little early. Plus, I think we started early to start with, but if you have questions, happy to address any.
Thanks. That was fantastic. Really exciting to imagine what this field is going to look like in the future as you're rolling all these things out. There was a question, are there any interests or efforts in incorporating historic data records from these diagnostic labs into EDDMapS if they are willing to share that data?
There are many efforts. With that comes lots of different discussions. Some, is any of that data confidential? Would it, on the ag side, have trade implications? The National Plant Diagnostic Network does have a repository of data, and we've been working with them over a number of years, coming up with how data could be exchanged between the systems. For many of those diagnostic labs, that's for the last about 15 years, maybe 20 years that they have their data digital. I know some of them have data going back to, here's my index cards of when we had diagnoses in the lab, and they kept great records. They're all on paper. So there's been conversations about what resources would it take to make that happen. It's the same thing you have in working with museums and other collections. So yeah, plenty of great conversations on pulling that together. It's an area we spend a lot of time in for EDDMap because we started as a data aggregator and we still are. So how do we connect to all these data sources and bring more information to the table to make better decisions?
Yeah, that's definitely a big task. I don't see any. Oh, here we go. We had one more question. How many labs are using EDDMapS?
There's currently 45 labs that are listed in EDDMapS. Some of those admittedly got in to go, hey, labs in EDDMapS, I want to see what's going on here. And they haven't done much more than look at the protocols other labs were using. But we've had about a dozen that are actively using it where we've had concentration on rosette disease, some herbicide resistance issues. It's tended to be driven more topically because the diagnostic labs in many cases do have lab management systems already in place. And so where they choose to spend time on it is where there has been funding and a driver to say, all right, we want to have this from citizen scientists or people in the field reporting all the way to the lab and verification and management covered. All right, now we'll come in and start working with this.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think we are going to keep moving.